silent treatment, Alina Martinez pressed her face against the cool hospital window. Watching the autumn rain streak down the glass like tears she refused to shed. In room 314 behind her, 8-year-old Tommy was carefully painting watercolor. Butterflies, his bald head catching the fluorescent light as he concentrated on getting the wings just right. These moments with her young patients usually filled Alina with purpose, but today, a growing ache in her chest made it hard to focus. "Miss Alina, do you think butterflies remember being caterpillars?" Tommy asked, not looking up from his artwork. Alina turned from the window, forcing a smile. "That's a beautiful question, Tommy. What do you think?" "I think they do," he said, adding delicate blue strokes to the butterfly's wings, because if they forgot, how would they know they could fly? The simple wisdom of her young patient hit Alina harder than she expected. Lately, she felt like she was forgetting how to fly, how to trust, how to believe in the solid ground of her marriage. David had been different for weeks, now distant, secretive, lost in thought even, when they were sitting right next to each other on their worn leather couch. Their 5th wedding anniversary was tomorrow. And for the first time since they'd been together, Alina hadn't planned anything. Usually she was the one marking their calendar months in advance, searching restaurants, or surprising David with weekend getaways to the mountains. But this year, something had shifted. David's mysterious behavior had left her feeling uncertain about everything, including whether he even remembered what day it was. When Alina arrived home that evening, the house felt hollow despite David's presence. He sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, papers scattered around him like he was solving some complex equation. His dark hair was messy from running his hands through it, a habit she usually found endearing but now seemed like evidence of his mental absence from their life together. "How was work?" she asked, setting her purse down with more force than necessary. "Fine," David replied without looking up, his fingers continuing to type. "How was the hospital?" Alina stared at the top of his head, waiting for him to elaborate. To ask about Tommy's progress, or the new art therapy program she'd been developing. When the silence stretched too long, she tried again. "Tommy asked me if butterflies remember being caterpillars," she said, hoping to spark the kind of philosophical conversation they used to have over dinner. David hummed, still focused. On his screen, the dismissal stung more than Alina wanted to admit. She opened the refrigerator, staring at the leftovers and takeout containers without really seeing them. When had they stopped talking? When had David's responses become single syllables and distracted nods? Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Rebecca. "Anniversary dinner plans tomorrow?" "Can't wait to hear all about David's surprise." Alina's throat tightened. Rebecca assumed, like Alina once had, that David was planning something special. Looking at him now, completely absorbed in whatever was on his laptop, Alina wondered if he even remembered what tomorrow was. The man who used to leave little love notes in her coffee mug hadn't written her so much as a text message in days. "I'm going to bed," Alina announced, testing whether David would notice her early retreat. "Okay, be up in a few minutes," he replied automatically. The same response he had given every night for the past 2 weeks. Alina knew he wouldn't come to bed for hours, if at all. Increasingly, she'd been waking up alone, finding David asleep. On the couch, with his laptop still warm beside him, as Alina brushed her teeth, she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. At 29, she still looked young, but there was something new in her eyes' wariness that reminded her uncomfortably of her mother's expression during those final months before Elena's father had walked out on their family. The comparison made her hands tremble as she set down her toothbrush. She slipped into bed. Listening to the familiar sounds of David's late-night routine in the kitchen, once those sounds had been comforting evidence that he was there, that they were building a life together. Now they felt like the movements of a stranger sharing her space out of habit rather than love. Tomorrow was their anniversary, and Alina had never felt more alone in her marriage. The breaking point, Alina woke to the sound of the front door closing and David's car engine starting in the driveway. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand 6:47 a.m., their anniversary morning, and her husband had left without so much as a whispered goodbye or a kiss on her forehead, rituals that had once been as natural as breathing between them. She lay in bed for another 20 minutes, staring at the ceiling and fighting the familiar knot of abandonment that had lived in her stomach since childhood. Her father had started leaving early too, before the morning he left and never came back. Lena shook her head, trying to dispel the comparison. David wasn't her father. David was steady, reliable, the man who had held her through panic attacks and celebrated every small victory in her career. But if that was true, where was that man now? By the time Alina arrived at the hospital, she had convinced herself that David was planning something, that his strange behavior was just poorly executed. Surprise preparation. She threw herself into work with renewed energy, determined to make the day meaningful, even if she had to do it alone. "You're glowing today, Miss Elena," said Mrs. Patterson, the grandmother of one of Elena's patients. "Special occasion?" "My wedding anniversary," Elena replied, surprised by how good it felt to say the words out loud. "5 years with my David," she added, and the pride in her voice felt genuine for the first time in weeks. Elena spent the morning with 3 different children, helping them create anniversary cards as a surprise project. 8-year-old Tommy was working on a watercolor garden, while 6-year-old Maria painted a sunset, and 10-year-old James carefully lettered a poem about love lasting forever. Their innocent enthusiasm for romance filled Elena's heart in a way she hadn't expected. "Love is like art," Tommy said seriously, his small hands steady despite the IV line taped to his arm. "Sometimes it's messy, but it's still beautiful." Elena's eyes misted as she watched him add delicate flowers to his painting. "You're absolutely right, Tommy." At lunch, Elena checked her phone obsessively. No messages from David, no missed calls. She tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. By 2 p.m., she was fighting back tears. By 4 p.m., she had called their favorite restaurant 3 times to confirm their 7 p.m. reservation, the one she had made 6 weeks ago, and mentioned to David at least 5 times since then. Rebecca stopped by during Elena's afternoon break, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expectant smile of someone ready to hear about romantic surprises. "So, what did David do this morning? Flowers? Breakfast in bed? Please tell me he at least remembered to say happy anniversary before he left for work." Elena's face must have given her away because Rebecca's expression immediately shifted to concern. "Elena, what's wrong? He left before I woke up. No note, no text, nothing." Elena's voice cracked on the last word. "I don't think he even remembers what today is." Rebecca sat down hard in the plastic chair beside Elena's desk. "That doesn't sound like David at all. You sure he's not planning something for tonight?" "We have dinner reservations at Marcello's at 7. If he's planning something, he's cutting it awfully close." Elena spent the rest of her shift oscillating between hope and dread. Maybe David was planning something elaborate that required all-day preparation. Maybe he was picking up jewelry or flowers or planning some grand gesture that would make his recent distance make sense. But as 6 p.m. approached and her phone remained silent, hope began to feel naive. She arrived at Marcello's at exactly 7 o'clock, wearing the blue dress David had complimented on their first anniversary. The hostess led her to their usual table by the window, the one that overlooked the small garden with twinkling lights. Elena ordered a glass of wine and waited 7-15, 7:30, 7:45. "Would you like to order, ma'am?" the waiter asked gently, his eyes sympathetic. "Just a few more minutes," Elena replied, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. At 8:15, Elena called David again. Voicemail. She left what she hoped was a calm message. "Hi, it's me. I'm at Marcello's, waiting for you. Our reservation was at 7. Please call me back." By 8:30, other diners were beginning to stare. Elena could feel their pity like a physical weight on her shoulders. She paid for her wine and left, her hands shaking as she walked to her car. The drive home passed in a blur of angry tears and racing thoughts. When she pulled into their driveway at 9 p.m., David's car wasn't there. Elena sat in her car for 10 minutes, crying harder than she had since her father left. She felt stupid for believing that David was different, for trusting that their marriage was solid when clearly she had been living in a fantasy. David finally came home at 11:47 p.m. Elena was lying in bed, still wearing her anniversary dress, staring at the wall. She heard his key in the lock, his footsteps in the hallway, the quiet sounds of him getting ready for bed. When he slipped into bed beside her, she couldn't stay silent anymore. "Where were you?" Her voice was raw from crying. Work ran late. Big. Project deadline. Do you know what today was, David? A pause. Then quietly. Of course I do. Alina turned over to face him, and in the dim light from the street lamp outside, she could see something in his expression that looked almost like guilt. Then why weren't you there? Why didn't you call? Why have you been acting like a stranger for weeks? Alina, I can explain. Don't. Alina's voice was sharper than she intended. Just don't. I can't do this anymore, David. I can't be married to someone who treats our anniversary like it's just another day. I can't keep wondering if you're going to disappear, like she stopped. Herself before she said like my father, but David knew. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Alina, please. You don't understand, you're right. I don't understand. I'm tired of trying to. Alina turned back toward the wall, her heart breaking with each word. Behind her, David lay silent, and for the first time in 5 years of marriage, they fell asleep angry, separated by more than just physical space. The revelation begins. Alina woke to the sound of voices in her front yard. Disoriented and puffy-eyed from crying, she stumbled to the bedroom window and peered through the blinds. Mrs. Rodriguez, her 73-year-old neighbor, was standing. On the sidewalk, talking animatedly to a man in a hard hat who was making notes on a clipboard. A white truck with City Planning Department, printed on the side, sat parked across the street. Alina glanced at the empty space beside her in bed. David had already left again, earlier than yesterday if that was possible. She checked her phone, no messages, no missed calls, no acknowledgement of the fight that had torn her heart in half the night before. After a quick shower, Alina stepped onto her front porch to retrieve the newspaper, hoping the morning air might clear the fog of exhaustion from her brain. Mrs. Rodriguez spotted her immediately and hurried over. Her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Alina, Mia, you look terrible. Are you sick? Just tired, Mrs. Rodriguez? Long day at the hospital yesterday? The older woman's dark eyes studied Alina's face with the sharp attention of someone who had raised 6 children and buried 1 husband. And how is that husband of yours? I haven't seen much of him lately, except... Mrs. Rodriguez trailed off, glancing back at the city planning truck with an expression Alina couldn't quite read. Except what? Oh, nothing. Nothing. Just neighborhood business. You know how these city people are, always measuring things, asking questions? Mrs. Rodriguez waved her hand dismissively, but her eyes held a secret. That David of yours, he's a good man, Alina. Sometimes the best men are the hardest to understand. Alina frowned. What do you mean? I mean, sometimes a man shows love in ways a woman doesn't expect. My Roberto, God rest his soul, he never brought me flowers, not once in 42 years of marriage. But every morning, he warmed up my car in winter and filled my coffee cup before I woke up. Love isn't always roses and poetry, Mia. Alina wanted to argue that David hadn't been doing anything loving lately, but something in Mrs. Rodriguez's tone stopped her. There was a knowing quality to her words, as if she was trying to tell Alina something without actually saying it. Should get to work, Alina said, stepping back toward her door. Alina, wait. Mrs. Rodriguez reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This fell out of David's car yesterday when he was getting those big rolls of paper from his back seat. Meant to give it back to him, but he was in such a hurry. Alina took the paper, her heart skipping as she recognized David's careful handwriting. It was a list, and at the top, in David's precise engineer's script, were the words Elena's Garden, Phase 1. Below that were itemized notes, Butterfly Garden, Monarchs, and Swallowtails. Check with Botanical Society Sensory Plants for Autism. Patience, Lavender. Rosemary, Textured Leaves, Accessible Pathways. Wheelchair and walker-friendly art stations. Weather-resistant. Child height tables, memorial wall, need approval from hospital board. Funding secured, personal savings, plus grant application submitted. Lena's hands began to shake as she read the list. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the words began to make sense. 3 years ago, she had mentioned to David her dream of creating a healing garden at the children's hospital. It had been a passing comment during dinner, sparked by watching Tommy struggle with his chemotherapy treatments. She had imagined a place where sick children could experience nature, create art outdoors, and find peace away from the sterile hospital rooms. She had never mentioned it again. She'd assumed David had forgotten, the way people forget casual dreams shared over takeout Chinese food. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Alina said slowly, "how long has David been meeting with city people?" The older woman smiled, the expression transforming her weathered face. "Oh, Mia, months now, since summer at least. Always very serious, always carrying those big papers. And the phone calls? I hear him in his backyard some evenings, talking about permits and soil samples and accessibility requirements." Elena's mind raced back through the past few months. David's mysterious phone calls, his late nights on the laptop, his distracted behavior and constant note-taking, the way he'd been asking casual questions about her work at the hospital, about which patients struggled most with being confined indoors. "There was another man here last week," Mrs. Rodriguez continued. "From the hospital, I think. He had one of those badges. They all stood in our little park area, pointing and measuring. David looked so worried, like he was afraid something wouldn't work out right." Alina felt dizzy. She gripped the porch railing, trying to process what she was hearing. David hadn't forgotten their anniversary. He hadn't stopped loving her. He had been working on something so much bigger than dinner reservations or jewelry. He had been trying to build her dream. "I have to go," Alina said suddenly, clutching the paper to her chest. Alina, wait. But Alina was already running too. Her car, her mind spinning with possibilities and a desperate need to understand what David had been planning. She drove to the hospital in a daze, her emotions swinging wildly between hope and confusion. At work, Alina found herself staring at every corner of the hospital grounds, trying to imagine where a garden might fit. During her lunch break, she walked the perimeter of the building, noticing for the first time the empty lot adjacent to the children's wing, a space she had passed hundreds of times without really seeing. The lot was overgrown with weeds, but it was large enough for pathways and planted areas. It faced east, which would provide morning sun but afternoon shade. It was perfect for the kind of healing space she had once dreamed about. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Coffee after work? You looked like you needed to talk." "Yesterday." Instead of responding, Alina called the hospital's main administration office. "Hi, this is Alina Martinez from the Art Therapy Department. I was wondering if you could tell me whether anyone has submitted a proposal recently for a garden or outdoor space near the children's wing." There was a pause, then the sound of typing. "Let me check our recent project submissions. Can you hold?" For just a moment, Elena's heart pounded as she waited. Through the window of her small office, she could see the empty lot, and for the first time, she could envision it filled with flowers and laughing children. "Ms. Martinez." "Yes, we do have a proposal on file. It was submitted about 6 weeks ago for something called the Elena Martinez Healing Garden. The proposal is still under review by the board, but it's quite comprehensive. Beautiful, actually." Elena's breath caught. Her name, David had named the garden after her. Who submitted the proposal? The primary contact is listed as David Chen. "Are you familiar with this project?" Alina closed her eyes, overwhelmed by a mixture of love, guilt, and wonder. "Yes," she whispered. "I think I'm beginning to be." The truth unfolds. Alina spent the rest of her workday in a fog of anticipation and regret. Every interaction with her young patients felt charged with new meaning as she imagined them. Playing in gardens that David had been secretly designing. When Tommy showed her his latest painting, a detailed butterfly emerging from its chrysalina, had to excuse herself to cry in the supply closet. She left work an hour early, something she never did, and drove home with her heart hammering against her ribs. David's car was in the driveway for the first time in weeks at 4 p.m. Alina sat in her car for several minutes, clutching Mrs. Rodriguez's recovered paper and trying to figure out how to approach the conversation that would either heal or break her marriage. When she walked through the front door, she found David exactly where she had left him the night before, at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and his laptop. But now Alina could see what she had missed before. The papers weren't random work documents. They were architectural drawings, plant catalogs, accessibility guidelines, and what looked like a detailed budget spreadsheet. David looked up when she entered, his face immediately shifting to the guarded expression he'd worn for weeks. "You're home early, David? We need to talk." Lena, about last night. I know about the garden. Lena set Mrs. Rodriguez's paper on the table between them, watching David's face cycle through surprise, panic, and something that might have been relief. David stared at the paper for a long moment, then looked up at Elena with eyes that were suddenly vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen in months. How much do you know? I know you've been working with the city planning department. I know you've submitted a proposal to the hospital for something called the Elena Martinez Healing Garden. I know this is what you've been doing all those nights. When I thought you were ignoring me, Elena's voice cracked on the last words. What I don't know is why you didn't tell me. David pushed back from the table and began pacing their small kitchen, running his hands through his hair in that familiar gesture of stress. Because what if it didn't work out? What if the hospital said no? Or the city denied the permits? Or we couldn't get the funding? What if I got your hopes up for something that might never happen? So instead you let me think you'd stop loving me. The words hit David like a physical blow. He stopped pacing and turned to face Elena, his expression stricken. Is that what you thought? What else was I supposed to think? You stopped talking to me, David. You were never home, never present, even when you were here. On our anniversary, you didn't even? Elena's voice broke. Elena, I was trying to finish everything by our anniversary. I wanted to surprise you with the news that it was approved, that we had funding, that construction could start. I've been working 18-hour days trying to coordinate with the hospital board, the city, the landscaping contractors. David sat down heavily in his chair. I missed our dinner because I was in a meeting with the hospital's chief administrator and the head of pediatric oncology. They had questions about the sensory garden specifications for autistic children and the accessibility requirements for kids in wheelchairs. Elena felt her anger and hurt beginning to transform into something else, understanding mixed with lingering pain. But why didn't you just tell me, even if it might not work out? David was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because you light up when you talk about helping those kids. When you come home and tell me about Tommy's progress or how Maria smiled for the first time after her surgery, your whole face changes. You become this force of healing and hope. He looked up at Elena. I was terrified of taking that light away from you if the project failed. Elena felt tears starting again, but these were different from the angry, hurt tears of the previous night. David, I would rather fail at something we dreamed about together than succeed at something I didn't even know you were working on. I know that now. David reached into the stack of papers and pulled out a thick folder. Do you want to see what I've been planning? Elena nodded, moving to sit beside him for the first time in weeks. David opened the folder, revealing detailed architectural drawings of the empty lot she had walked past so many times, but in these drawings, the space was transformed into something magical. The main pathway would be wide enough for wheelchairs and hospital beds, David explained, pointing to the drawings. We'd have raised garden beds at different heights so kids can garden whether they're standing, sitting, or lying down. This area would be the butterfly gardenweed plant, milkweed, and other host plants to attract monarchs. Elena studied the drawings, amazed by the level of detail. David had thought of everything, covered areas for rainy days, water features that would provide soothing sounds, even small alcoves where families could have private conversations away from the bustle of the hospital. This section would be dedicated art stations, David continued, his voice growing stronger as he saw Elena's engagement. Weather-resistant tables at different heights with storage for supplies. In this wall here, he pointed to a curved structure near the back of the garden. Would be a memorial space for families who've lost children. Nothing sad or overwhelming, just a quiet place for remembrance. Elena traced the lines of the drawing with her finger, seeing her wildest dreams made concrete in David's careful plans. How long have you been working on this? Since you mentioned it 3 years ago? I started researching therapeutic gardens the next day. I've been saving money, learning about grant applications, studying accessibility requirements. When I felt ready to actually make it happen, I started the official process about 6 months ago. 6 months? Elena repeated softly. David, this must have cost most of our savings, David admitted, and about 1,000 hours of research, planning, and meetings. But Elena, if you could see what the doctors think this could do for their patients, ... double quotes, His eyes were bright with excitement now. Dr. Williams in oncology says gardening therapy has been shown to reduce anxiety and depression in pediatric cancer patients. The occupational therapists are excited about the sensory elements. For kids with autism and developmental delays, Alina felt overwhelmed by the scope of what David had been planning, by the months of work he'd poured into making her casual dream a reality. What happens now? The hospital board meets next week to make a final decision. All the permits are approved, the contractors are lined up, and the funding is secured if they say yes. David hesitated. Alina, I need you to know even if they reject it, even if this was all for nothing, I don't regret trying. Watching you work with those kids, seeing how much you care about their healing. Wanted to give you a way to help more of them. Alina looked at the man she had married, really looked at him for the first time in months. His face was thinner than she remembered, with new lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless worry. His hair was longer than usual, unkempt from weeks of distracted grooming. He looked exhausted and anxious and hopeful all at once. I'm sorry I doubted you, Alina whispered. I'm sorry I assumed the worst. I'm sorry I let you. David reached for her hand tentatively, and this time, Alina didn't pull away. I got so focused on protecting the surprise that I forgot to protect us. Alina squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses he'd developed from weekend trips to nurseries and construction sites. Next time you want to build me a garden, just tell me, okay? I'd rather help you dig than wonder if you still love me. David brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. There's never going to be a question of whether I love you, Alina. The only question is whether I'm brave enough to love you the way you deserve. Alina looked again at the drawings spread across their kitchen table, months of secret work motivated entirely by love for her and the children she served. It was the most romantic gesture anyone had ever made for her, precisely because it wasn't about her at all. It was about the dreams she carried and the healing she wanted to bring to the world. When will we know? She asked. Tuesday. The board meets Tuesday morning. Alina nodded, and for the first time in weeks she felt genuinely hopeful about their future. Whatever the hospital decided, she and David would face it together. Seeds of Forever Tuesday morning arrived, gray and drizzly. The kind of weather that seemed to match Alina's nervous energy. She had barely slept, alternating between excitement and terror about what the hospital board might decide. Been up since 5 a.m., pacing the kitchen and checking his phone obsessively for any early communication from the hospital administration. The meeting starts at 9, David said for the fourth time, pouring himself another cup of coffee with shaking hands. Dr. Williams said they'd call as soon as they reached a decision. Alina wrapped her arms around him from behind, feeling the tension in his shoulders. Whatever happens, I'm proud of what you've done. What we've done, she corrected herself, still getting used to thinking of the garden as their shared dream at 8:30. Alina left for work, kissing David goodbye with more tenderness than she'd felt in months. Call me the second you hear anything. At the hospital, Alina found herself unable to concentrate on anything. During her morning session with Tommy, she kept glancing at her phone, willing it to ring. Tommy noticed her distraction and set down his paintbrush. Alina, are you waiting for something important? Yes, Tommy. Something that could help a lot of kids like you. Tommy considered this seriously. Is it scary? Waiting? Very scary. When I was waiting to find out if my treatment was working, my mom told me that the scariest waits are usually for the most important things. She said that's how you know something really matters. Lena smiled at the 8-year-old's wisdom. Your mom sounds very smart. She is. And she says, butterflies spend their whole time in the cocoon waiting to become something beautiful. Maybe waiting is just part of becoming. At 11:47 a.m., Elena's phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, and her heart nearly stopped. Alina. Oh. David's voice was strange, tight with emotion she couldn't identify. What did they say? They said yes. Alina felt her knees go weak. They said yes, not just yes. They said it was the most comprehensive and thoughtful proposal it ever received for a patient care enhancement project. Dr. Williams presented it to the board. They approved it unanimously. Alina, they want to break ground next month. Alina started crying right there in the middle of the hospital corridor, clutching her phone and sobbing with relief and joy. Several nurses stopped to check on her, and through her tears, she managed. to explain that these were happy tears, the best kind of tears. There's more, David continued. The board was so impressed with the proposal that they want to fast-track the project. And Alina, they want you to be the official program coordinator. They're creating a new position, director of therapeutic gardens. They want you to oversee not just this garden, but potentially others, if this one is successful. Lena had to sit down on the floor of the hallway. David, I can't, ... This is too much. It gets better. The local newspaper wants to do a story about it. The mayor's office called to congratulate us. And 3 other hospitals in the state have already contacted Dr. Williams, asking about implementing similar programs. Alina laughed through her tears. We're going to need a bigger garden. Actually, about that. The board approved the full design, but they also allocated additional space if we want to expand in phase 2. Lena, we could eventually have gardens. For different age groups, different types of therapy, maybe even a greenhouse for year-round programs. That afternoon, Lena left work early with permission. This time Anne met David at the empty lot that would soon become the Alina Martinez Healing Garden. They stood at the edge of the overgrown space, holding hands and trying to envision the transformation that would begin in just a few weeks. I keep thinking about what Tommy said, Alina told David, about butterflies waiting in their cocoons to become something beautiful. Maybe that's what we were doing these past few months, waiting to become something we couldn't even imagine. David squeezed her hand. I'm sorry it took me so long to learn how to include you in the waiting. Alina turned to face him, struck by how different he looked now that the secret was finally out. The stress lines around his eyes had softened, and there was a lightness in his expression that she hadn't seen in months. David, can I tell you something? Even when I was angry, even when I thought you'd forgotten our anniversary and stopped caring about us, there was this tiny voice in my head that kept saying, this isn't who David is. I should have listened to that voice sooner, and I should have trusted you with my dreams sooner, even the fragile ones, especially the fragile ones. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the rain create small puddles in what would soon be pathways. Alina could almost see it, children, in wheelchairs rolling along smooth paths, laughing as they planted seeds and raised beds, families finding comfort in quiet memorial spaces, Tommy and Maria and James creating art under covered pavilions while butterflies danced around them. What do we do now? Alina asked. Now we build it, together. Every decision, every plant choice, every design modification, we do it together. Alina smiled. I'd like that. Although I have to warn you, I have very strong opinions about butterfly gardens. I was counting on it. As they walked back to their car, Alina felt something shift inside her chest. A loosening of fears she'd carried since childhood, a settling into trust that felt deeper than it had before their crisis. They had weathered their first real test as a married couple, and they had emerged not just intact but stronger. David, yeah, happy anniversary. I know it's a few days late, but this is the best anniversary gift anyone has ever given me. David stopped walking and pulled Alina into his arms, right there in the rain. Alina Martinez Chen, I promise you this. I will never again let you wonder if you matter to me. You are the reason I get up in the morning, the reason I want to build beautiful things in the world. Alina kissed him, tasting rain and promise in the future they would grow together. Around them, the empty lot waited patiently for spring, for the groundbreaking ceremony, for the transformation that would turn weeds into wonder. 6 months later, on a sunny morning in March, Alina stood in the same spot holding a golden shovel, surrounded by hospital staff, city officials, and a dozen children from the pediatric ward who had come to witness the official groundbreaking of the Alina Martinez Healing Garden. Tommy, now in remission and sporting a head of downy new hair, had been chosen to help Alina turn the first shovel full of soil. Ready, Miss Alina? Tommy asked, his small hands gripping the shovel handle beside hers. Alina looked at David, who was standing with the crowd, his face bright with pride and love. She thought about butterflies and cocoons, about the way love sometimes speaks in secret languages, about the gardens that grow when two people choose to trust each other with their dreams. Ready, she said, and together they began to dig.